Why, hello there. Welcome back to the Star Wars headquarters. Hope you're all doing good. And I am talking about J.J. Abrams today because he recently was featured in an interview, and Collider did a piece on him as well, talking about his reflections and regrets on the sequel trilogy. And you can see by the headline here, it says, "I do think that there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going." And of course, that's an understatement. And we're going to take a look at what J.J. Abrams said in this article. There's a lot of text here. I'm going to scroll right down to his quote and get right to the point. So this is what Collider said right here. So it says, "So when I spoke to J.J. Abrams recently for a press day celebrating the 10th anniversary of his film Super 8, which is now available on 4K UHD Blu-ray, I asked him about this creative handoff. Specifically, does he feel the Star Wars trilogy would have benefited from having a plan from the very beginning?" I can't believe that has to be asked at this point, but it says, in answering, Abrams drew from his wealth of experience in television. And he goes on to say this, said, "I've been involved in a number of projects that have been, in most cases, series that have ideas that begin the thing where you feel like you know where it's going. And sometimes it's an actor who comes in. Other times it's a relationship that as written doesn't quite work, and things that you think are gonna just be so well received just crash and burn, and other things that you think like, oh, that's a small moment, or that's an episode character, one episode character, suddenly become a hugely important part of the story." He then goes on to say, "I feel like what I've learned as a lesson a few times now, and it's something that especially in this pandemic year, working with writers has become clear. The lesson is that you have to plan things as best you can, and you always need to be able to respond to the unexpected, and the unexpected can come in all sorts of forms. And I do think that there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going." Understatement of the century right there. And again, to his credit, I will say this. I really did enjoy episode 7. I felt like episode 7 was a good start to the sequel trilogy of Star Wars. Even though it wasn't perfect, I would have preferred to see, of course, Han, Leia, and Luke actually meet all together in person. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes of the sequel trilogy. So again, episode 7 is still not perfect, but it was a good start for the sequel trilogy. And as you can see from this interview here, you know, it's obviously sounding like J.J. Abrams has some big regrets with not following through with episode 8 and episode 9, because I know that he was debating on actually directing episode 8, but he stepped down to have a break from directing and then gave it over to Rian Johnson, who, of course, as we know, changed the entire story that J.J. Abrams had planned and set out for the sequel trilogy. So leave a comment down below. If J.J. Abrams would have had full visionary control over episode 7 through episode 9, do you think the results would have been much better? In my opinion, I think so. I think if J.J. Abrams would have been the single visionary over the entire trilogy, it would have been much better. And bring in Dave Filoni, of course, and Jon Favreau would have helped as well, because as you know, those guys are masterminds at planning and being the visionaries for Star Wars stories. Now, the article then goes on to say this. It says, "There are projects that I've worked on where we had some ideas, but we hadn't worked through them enough. Sometimes we had some ideas, but then we weren't allowed to do them the way we wanted to. I've had all sorts of situations where you plan things in a certain way and you suddenly find yourself doing something that's 180 degrees different. And then sometimes it really works. It works really well, and you feel like, wow, that really came together. And then other times you think, oh my God, I can't believe this is where we are. And sometimes when it's not working out, it's because it's what you planned. And other times when it's not working out, it's because you didn't have a plan." And of course, I do understand what he's saying right here, that you have to be dynamic in the way you create and write Star Wars stories, or any story for that matter. And you have to be willing to adapt and make changes depending on how the audience is receiving that story. And I think that's what he tried to do, of course, after episode 8, when he stepped in for episode 9, because as you know, there was a lot of backlash with Star Wars Episode 8, so I think that J.J. Abrams applied what he's saying here and tried to quickly adapt, but honestly, the whole thing could have been avoided if there would have been just that one visionary overseeing the entire sequel trilogy. And honestly, you know, Episode 7, I still do think it was a pretty decent start. Again, like I said before, it wasn't perfect. It had some issues there, for sure, but yeah, what do you think? Leave your comments. Join in on the conversation in the comments. I'm really curious to see what you all have to say about that now. He goes on to say this. You just never know. It says, you just never really know. By having a plan, I have learned in some cases the hard way is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence or effect or joke or whatever, but you want to be leading to something inevitable. And again, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of like he's stating the obvious. I'm kind of shocked that they didn't know to do this from the beginning, and to actually kind of experiment with something as big as a sequel trilogy and experiment with handing off the story to different directors was a massive risk that, in my opinion, did not go well for Disney and Lucasfilm and J.J. Abrams, obviously, because it kind of resulted in this mess from one movie to the other. And again, there's parts of the sequel trilogy that I absolutely love and adore. Don't get me wrong. There are many parts in the sequel trilogy that I do enjoy. And I think going back to episode 7, if they would have just followed through from episode 7 to 8 to 9 with one visionary director behind all of it, it would have ended up much better. So again, sound off in the comments. What do you make of this? Leave your comments down below. And right now, obviously, Lucasfilm and Disney are taking a whole new approach with The Mandalorian by having those visionaries behind the entire project like Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. And it's exciting to see that for sure, because I do feel like Star Wars is coming back in a really good way. I'm really looking forward to the Book of Boba Fett. Really looking forward to Mandalorian Season 3, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, the Ahsoka series. So there's so much to look forward to. And with Dave Filoni upgraded to the executive creative position now at Lucasfilm, that's some huge news as well, because he's a visionary for, from what I understand, almost everything at this point. So very exciting stuff indeed happening over at Lucasfilm. And it looks like they've learned their lessons from the sequel trilogy for sure. So I'm really looking forward to reading your comments. Sound off in the comments. Join the conversation. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. I'll see you all next time, and may the Force be with you always.